Okay, first group, Tenocystoids. Teno, remember, means comb. And cyst is just like a little sack. Yeah. So they're little sacks with a comb at one end. And sure enough, that's exactly what they are. So up here, this is the part they're calling comb-like. And you can see it's a bunch of little plates that are surrounding a central opening. And they've actually got some fossils where these plates are kind of up like that. So it's like a little mouth. The plates can lift up and it can eat, or we think this is the only part of the body that is got a skeleton on it anyway. So it may be that the creature moved with these plates, like sort of dragging it along with its teeth. That would be very weird. Or it could be, see, there's a little posterior bit down here, this little PP bit. It may be that there was a non mineralized tail on the back of that, and then later versions sort of mineralized that tail. That's not certain, and I don't believe there's good soft tissue for these that preserves anything like that. So I am currently making that bit up, but that would make it make sense a little more. Otherwise, how would they move? And they must have moved because you can't just be completely sedentary this deep in the water like they lived and expect to survive. Yeah, because they have no external way of capturing food either, except it looks like by moving and sort of scooping into that mouth at the front. So, yeah, mysterious little creatures, and somebody's going to publish something good, and then we'll understand them better. So here are some other tenocystoids. So this is the famous one. This is the one we have a fossil of in the lab. Here are some others, and you can see they all have some sort of little comby structure. Up at the top here, we're looking at the comb structure, and there's our little mouth like opening, probably in the center. Because remember, with all these fossils, what we get preserved are usually just impressions of the stereom. And the stereom's the middle bit. So it's not the organs, those were inside, soft, gone. And it's not the external parts, like the sort of skin, if you like, gone as well. It's the middle bit. Yeah. So you got to kind of imagine the outside and the inside. And so, for example, on creatures like this, we sometimes don't have a good idea of how these things worked. Like, did they have a U-shaped gut? Did they have stuff come in and go back out the same thing, the same opening? Did they have a long sort of pass-through gut like a snake or a human? Hard to say. The people that are really good in this field have ideas, but it's hard to definitively show any of those yet. They get more fossils, though somebody will be able to do it, I think. All right, so those were tenocystoids. And these, we think, are the earliest group of echinoderms. They're the most primitive. They have the earliest set of features. Everything else is like an outgrowth from these. What they've got is almost, but not quite, bilateral symmetry. Because look, that's a fat plate. This plate is longer than that plate. But you can kind of draw a line down the middle. Oh, and the little tiny platelets in the center, those are just baby plates, and they are just chaos in there. It doesn't seem to be very good order, at least as preserved in the fossils that we've got. Yeah. So next one up that seems as though it's maybe a development from tenocystoids, although this is not. It has been suggested by several authors, but it hasn't been really formalized yet. It's this group called Cincta. So, like if you took a tenocystoid, maybe rounded it off a little bit, although these things stretch in all sorts of shapes. So, we still got little plates in the middle, we still got big plates around the outside. There are plates on the top side that appear to have little holes in them. This may be something like a gill, but usually we don't get the actual plates preserved. More commonly, you get a space in the rock that is the shape that the plate used to be, plus or minus some crushing of the rock. So it's kind of hard to be certain. And also, these plates were strong enough when they were like inside of skin, like skin on the outside and organs on the inside. But once the creature dies and starts to, break apart, these plates are not cemented together. These would allow a little movement between every plate. It's like if your whole body was joints, even your rib cage. And so the plates just sort of fragment, and then because they're sterium, they tend to break up. So the small plates in the center are often kind of higgledy-piggledy by the time you find them. But with these, at least, we have what looks like maybe a mouth, and it would be lovely to see these things, putting something into their mouth or choking on their food or something like that. I wish them no ill, but that would at least sort of confirm what we think. And so it's this little hole, and it's going to be located right about there. And if you flip it over here, so this is the top side. Top side's going to have a little anus on it. And so if the mouth is here and the anus is here and the gills are back here, then basically it's got some sort of U-shaped gut, or maybe it's a short U-shaped gut up here. And maybe respiration is back here. Where's the brain? I don't know. Probably running in a circle around the entire thing. We could guess, but until we get preservation that actually shows the nerves, we're not going to know for sure. So that's just how it is. But yeah, since these have a little belt going around the outside, we call them cincta, which is, just belt pretty much. Um, uh, Now, these things, their big innovation is that they have this appendage on the back. And the appendage may have been swung side to side, although it doesn't look like the plates articulate very well for that kind of motion. It looks more like they'd work better for up and down motion, maybe. Although it could also be that I don't fully understand this creature. Um, but yes, the idea is that this is some kind of tail that flaps in the mud side to side or up and down, and is going to sort of push the front end along, and sort of the motion of pushing is going to scoop dirt into its mouth, and then it will extract all the good stuff from the dirt and poop out all the bad stuff from the dirt. And that's how they'll live, just like a Roomba, basically a Roomba with a tail going around hoovering up stuff off the seafloor. Yeah, that's cinctans. Yeah. And we do have a couple of fossils of these in various states of falling apart after they're dead, but you can still see what they are. So here's another cinctan, just because cinctans are cool. And see, this one doesn't even have much of a tail. So this looks as though it's either transitional between things like tenocystids and cinctans, or it is a cinctan that is sort of regressing. It's like, I don't need this much of a tail. Let's go back to the less mineralized tail. Maybe it has the same length of tail, but it's more just like muscles under skin and not as much bones supporting that. Hard to say, though, and I certainly don't have any information that would refute this as being the entire skeleton and a rough outline of the entire organism. So there you go. And then you can see the mouth again, right there. Nice little groove. All right. So, tenocystoids, which are first, third, and fourth, and cinctans, which are the second one here, do have a lot in common. So there's the idea that these little tiny plates all the way up here along the top may be analogous with the comb plates that are over here. They're showing them in different colors to be super careful, but it kind of looks as though you could just shrink one and make the other. Now, that's what happens a lot with genes. You'll get things that look really different, but really it's just like magnifying or shrinking one part of it, then everything else still fits in around it, and you get a slightly different looking version of more or less the same thing. Yeah. So, a big difference is this posterior marginal plate right down here. That's the PP, the posterior plate, which you do find on the tenocystids. You don't find it here, and it may well be that the genes that went toward making that plate have actually been modified. So instead of making just one plate, they're making a whole little tail of alternating plates. That's what it looks like, but you would have to reconstruct more of the genetics than we're probably ever going to be able to reconstruct to know for sure. But it's plausible. It's a plausible hypothesis anyway, I think. All right. So, next group are going to be called the stylophorans, and they're all going to have a thing called a stylophore. Yeah, neat how that works. Stylophore is this thing at the end. So it's this sort of chunky thing, and it's got ridges, rows of multiple plates here, and then it's going to go down to a row of just single plates that extend. It looks as though it is probably involved in locomotion. It's on the opposite ends to where the mouth would be for most of these organisms. If you look at the stylophore itself, it's structured a little bit similar to the way a crinoid's arm is structured. If you happen to already know crinoids, they're the sea lilies, the famous ones. Some great giant ones in the Houston Museum of that. So here are three reconstructions for what a stylophore might be for, and I can't say that any of these is more correct than the others. I can just say that I guess I would be more likely to believe the top one, which is that you would just have muscles in here, and so these are the muscles for flapping this stylophore, probably side to side, and moving the creature along. But there's one interpretation where they would say, well, what if they had something like a concentrated brain located at the right where the stylophore touches the rest of the body, which would make it kind of like the same position as our brain stem. If you think of the cup part as like a head, and then the rest of this is like a spine that's going to flap around side to side and move it along on the bottom. It's just like a little flapping, flap walking skull. Yeah, from the deep sea. That's all they are. It is possible if we have really nice fossils, and we probably will someday. We may be able to sort out between these things. And it's also possible that the plates on top are not actually fixed plates on top of the stylophore, but they're plates that can be opened, which would reveal something like an ambulacral groove, which is a double row rather, of tube feet, which is characteristic of modern echinoderms. Now, we don't know if this was a feature of the original ones, but you do find it in a couple groups that are related to echinoderms, like the hemichordates. So it looks like it may be ancestral to this group. But the earliest echinoderms don't seem to have one that we can see. And so this interpretation would at least put some of these little tube feet in there, and we would just say, oh yeah, they were there. They were just under a couple of little panels that usually stay closed. It's possible. I think we would have figured this out already if it was true, but I could be wrong there. That is just a hunch. Yeah, so maybe they're in there. I don't know. That'd be cool. But in this interpretation, I think the insane part is that they say there will be a mouth that's located right about here, which I guess there could be. Why not put your mouth in your... But then what do you do with all the rest of this? Is this all just for digestion and like protecting your gonads? Animals have done weirder stuff for sure, but that just, I don't know, that doesn't quite seem right that the mouth would be right there at the junction. But who knows? Yeah. So kind of a do-it-all organ. Yeah. All right. So within the stylophorans, we're going to have a couple major groups. The first one are going to be the cornutes, and then cornu is going to be a horn. Yeah. And so here are the little horns on this particular one. Now, the thing that's functioning as its mouth is probably right there in between these two. And the thing that's functioning as the mouth here is probably right over there. These have been reconstructed as having a stylophore that does have movable cover plates. So this is one that's supporting that idea. It doesn't go so far as to say that the mouth would be here, because it looks like there's a very mouthy looking thing with looks like little comb plates up at the other end. Why would you need two mouths? Probably you wouldn't. But what are they? I don't know. The other innovation here is that you have this row of long slits, and the slits are going to be on the top side, so they're always up in the water, they're never down in the mud. So that would be where you would want them if they were functioning like gills. They're basically respiration aid. Because you have this skeleton that's covering your entire body. How do you get oxygen in? They don't have lungs. Yeah. So, it becomes a problem. And it may be that they have developed these. And they're actually pretty close to the groups like hemichordates and chordates that do have little gill slits. So it's possible that this is related to those from an unknown common ancestor. Probably early Cambrian, maybe late Ediacaran. Probably early Cambrian, though. Yeah. All right, and one more on cornutes because they're so awesome. These are both cornutes, by the way, and they're actually the same thing. If you're looking at the underside, there's this plate that runs across. See, that's like the middle. This is the same plate that's over here. See how it's like two plates that one comes off the front end, one comes off the back end, and they join up there. So this is just you're taking this shape and you're like grabbing the corners of the image and stretching it and deforming it. They're basically the same thing, and that's roughly how they work as far as we can tell. But yeah, very asymmetrical, very, very, very asymmetrical creatures. Asymmetrical top to bottom and asymmetrical left to right. There's no plane of symmetry. Although there are areas, like in the stylophore, where you could say, yeah, there's a pretty good plane of symmetry, actually. Dr. Newman, yeah. Here are some actual fossils of them. Here you can see, look at those little gills. And we have these. Oh, yes, we have these from the very early Ordovician of Morocco. And you can actually see the little gills on both of them. Look for those. Yeah, it's worth it. Oh my gosh, it'll make your day. Um, uh, this is from a paper that shows some other forms, and a lot of these apparently had these little, it's like little arm plates along the side that maybe they could have been for extra motion. Maybe they could have been some kind of extra sort of like a bucket brigade. They're scooping food from the back and passing it up to the front. Hard to tell. I haven't seen a good set of experiments to explain what's going on here. But when we get to later things like crinoids and paracrinoids and blastoids, they're like a little cup in the center, and they've got rows of little arms that kind of run up the seams, and those arms are grabbing food and bringing it up toward the mouth. So those may be derived from this. Whatever cornutes we're using them for may not be the same as what like a blastoid was using them for, but it could be as well. Yeah, it's a thing that remains to be figured out. And so the plates that are homologous, like that share a common ancestor and are probably made by the same genes, are marked in the same colors here, just so you can sort of follow. And all these things do seem to have, on the underside at least, a little opening between these plates. And the ones that don't have an opening, they have been able to map where the plates are. And so maybe that those plates are just normally found shut, but they could open a little bit to let something in, or something like that. Because moving your entire mouth to a totally different part of your body seems difficult, yeah, to me, but it may be less difficult. Maybe everything's easy for echinoderms. I don't know. Couldn't tell you. Next group of stylophorans are the mitrates. Here's a mitrate, looking good. Mitrates will often, but not always, have two little horns on them, so they're like little devils. They have this sort of pointy appearance of the little horns, and it's not very much like a bishop's mitre. But at the front, they're going to have little oral plates, little tiny things that look like a little shrunken version of a comb. So maybe these are descended from something like a Echino-cystid. And these have pretty good, it's not quite, but they're trying, and you got to give them at least partial credit for trying, right? Pretty good bilateral symmetry on some of these. The other thing that they've got going on are they've got these little openings at the back, which I would say are probably something like a water vascular system opening and an anus, but we don't have the soft part, so we cannot tell which is which or if either of those is at all correct. And they have another little set of openings. Now, are those gill openings? Are those eyes, as has been proposed? I mean, I kind of doubt they're eyes, but they could be eyes. Brittle stars are famously, they can kind of see through most of their armor, or much of the armor on their bodies. So they've got like light sensitive tissue underneath their little stereome armor. Yeah, crazy. And they've even got stuff that's a little bit like lenses. They can make their, modulate their stereome. All right, so those are mitrates. It's like big plates surrounding a thing. It's not the sort of belt of plates and then little tiny ones inside, although you can see a little bit of that going on here. But yeah, good bilateral symmetry-ish, bilateral-ish symmetry in there. And so we'll wrap up stylophorans and then we'll go on to the next section. So stylophorans, you can actually track the same plate as it's going through development. And so you can see that plate that's like the front end joining plate here is the one that's colored in black. You can see where it comes from on the most primitive one, and you can see where it ends up as just kind of like a standard middle plate here, but that's showing you developmentally all they're doing is stretching the proportions of the different parts for the most part. So probably the animal inside is fairly similar. There's probably something like a mouth at the front, an anus wherever the sort of intestine-like things end up, or maybe the anus is a lie and that's just a pore for the water vascular system to exchange. I have no idea. Yeah, and at some point people will have a better idea, but yeah, watch this space. So there you go. Stylophorans are probably a group, and this one shows that everything that we would call a cornute, which is down here, and everything that we would call a mitrate, which are this later end up here, mitrates are just like the most recent versions of cornutes. They're a little more armored, a little tougher, but kind of the same thing. And they have these sort of mobile arms on the front. Yeah. So it's not really that different, maybe. This is a good hypothesis, I think. So we'll leave you with that. And then on to some other fascinating echinoderms in just a moment.